Hello everyone, this is Albert, and in this video, as promised, I'm going to be discussing why I even bother with such things as Zeitgeist and the Christ conspiracy and the whole Jesus mythicism, pagan parallels nonsense. In a sense, it may be considered an apologia for doing such an apologia. The first thing to realize is that while such opinions as you find in this material is certainly not found among the scholarly community, they do have a growing and vocal presence on the internet. And the fact is that more people are likely to read an anti-Christian website than a scholarly treatise on the history of religion. Thus, increasingly, Christians are facing these sorts of misrepresentations of the historical evidence. And the problem is, of course, if they are trying to fulfill the biblical mandate to provide a defense for anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is within you, it's difficult when there is so much rubble on the road to providing that defense. And so, in a sense, we need to clear some of the rubble. Even if it is ridiculous rubble, it's still rubble that needs to be cleared. Now, until recently, most Christian scholars and apologists gave scant attention to what's called Jesus mythicism and the copycat thesis. And by the way, just so I can make this clear, the difference, Jesus mythicism is the idea that, when I refer to Jesus mythicism, is the idea that Jesus is a fictional character. He never really existed. And when I talk about the copycat thesis, I'm talking about the idea that the stories in the New Testament are a copy of prior pagan mythology. Now, these two are not necessarily the same, although they often are intertwined. They often go together. With many of the Jesus mythicists also subscribe to the copycat thesis, but not necessarily. You can be one without the other. For example, you could believe that Jesus was a fictional character, but he was created entirely in a Jewish milieu, and people have made that argument. You may also believe that Jesus was a real person, but the story, much of the New Testament, many of the stories were basically things taken from pagan mythology and imposed upon his biography after the fact, and some people have held that view as well. So you can be one without being the other, but in many cases, the two go hand in hand, and much of what I will be dealing with in the book is assuming those cases where they're hand in hand, although there will be specific incidents where I will be referring to just one or the other, and we'll say so at that point. Now, as I said, most scholars hadn't really paid attention to these ideas. The fact is that there were more serious critics of Christianity that needed to be answered. You probably remember the Jesus Seminar and, of course, Bart Ehrman in recent years. And responding to this fringe material that one finds in such ridiculous productions as Zeitgeist or the books by Tom Harper, Freaking Gandhi, and Acharya S., responding to that stuff was often considered to be a complete waste of time, particularly among Christian scholars. As N.T. Wright once put it, responding to these people would be like asking a professional astronomer to debate with the authors of a book claiming the moon was made of green cheese. Now, the desire to ignore such nonsensical claims is certainly understandable. But when accusations go unanswered, as was initially the case, for example, with Dan Brown's novel, or the historic claims Dan Brown made within his novel, for his novel, The Da Vinci Code, the ridiculous can gain traction in today's popular culture. That incident alone should have served as a wake-up call, as it demonstrated that absurd ideas concerning Jesus could spread rapidly across the internet and into Main Street America. Now, recent responses by Christian apologists to these Jesus mythicism, the copycat thesis, have varied greatly in their quality. Some of them that you will find by some apologists are quite excellent. I would certainly recommend, there's a collection of articles put together by J.P. Holding titled Shattering the Christ Smith. It's a fairly large paperback book. I would certainly recommend that. I would recommend the Stanley Porter and Stephen J. Bedard's Unmasking the Pagan Christ, which is also excellent. But other books were not that helpful, or other responses were not that helpful. In some cases, the people responding had not really studied the issues. They hadn't really read the other side's books, or maybe dealt with one thing, and they had not thoroughly studied the issue. And basically, all they did was regurgitate arguments, responses by Christians that were already out there, and didn't add anything new, and did not deal with more recent material put out by people supporting these ideas. Even worse, some apologists return the conspiracy theories found in so much of this material with some paranoia of their own. In such cases, the debate ended up focusing less on the evidence than on which side were the agents of the Illuminati, or the dupes of the Illuminati, as the case may be. Thus, some Christian apologists unfortunately proved themselves fully capable of adopting the same conspiratorial mindset that has fueled much of the recent anti-Christian polemics. Now, my own experience with these topics began about a decade and a half ago, when a one-time acquaintance I met, who was a follower of the conspiracy theorist Jordan Maxwell, as I would find out, challenged me. Once he realized he discovered I was a Christian, he challenged me to examine the evidence that Maxwell and others had compiled on Christianity's origins. Once I sort of got the drift of where he was going with this, I really thought it was pretty absurd, and really didn't want to deal with it. But he was very insistent and said he would, give me all the stuff and let me look at it. And finally, I reluctantly agreed. He supplied me with videos, audio tapes, books. I think he had the VHS tapes, if anyone remembers those. And I took a look at the stuff. And fortunately, at the time, I did have access to the university library and was able to start checking some of this, and once faced with the evidence. At that point, I began examining it, and I soon discovered that it was based upon 19th century pseudo-scholars, who in turn derived their material from earlier esoteric mysticism. In other words, it was all occultic nonsense from a bygone era. With my initial instincts thus confirmed by a more thorough investigation, I chose not to engage the subject any further, and at some point soon thereafter I lost contact with the aforementioned budding conspiracy theorist. Now, over the next decade or so, I would hear of similar themes surfacing through stories in the media. There was the Tom Harper's The Pagan Christ. When that came out, that caused a bit of a stir. And I know there was the freaking Gandhi's Jesus Mysteries. But basically, this stuff was pretty much off of my radar. I paid little heed to the conspiracy theories on Christian origins then seeping into the popular culture. Now, go forward a few years, and I suddenly began hearing of a film titled Zeitgeist that some claimed had proved Jesus was a pagan solar metaphor. I was asked on multiple occasions if I knew anything about it. Replied, frankly, I didn't. I had never seen it, never even heard of it by that point. But I added that it might, or probably was, related to some bogus claims I had encountered earlier with the Jordan Maxwell material. Over the next few months, I heard more and more of this film, and with my curiosity piqued, I discovered an online transcript. At that point, I didn't really want to waste my time watching it, but I did find the transcript and decided to, it listed its sources, and at this point, it was the original transcript, not the later source guide. And a quick look at those references confirmed they were largely the same 19th century pseudo-scholars, along with some newer sources that I found were dependent upon those 19th century pseudo-scholars. And frankly, I just chuckled at the filmmaker's gullibility. Assured it was all too silly to be taken seriously, I predicted it would have a short shelf life and then be forgotten, except perhaps for a small cult following. I was wrong. Former Christians soon began showing up on internet forums that basically either Christian internet forums or other internet forums where Christianity was discussed, repeating the same claims and citing this film as a major factor in their leaving the church. Worst of all, this was just the tip of the iceberg, as a torrent of new theories or old recycled theories linking Jesus to prior pagan gods began circulating. The quality of these theories ranged from the superficially plausible to the completely insane. Some repeated much outdated scholarship. Others were conjured by the fertile imaginations of deluded conspiracy theorists. All of them have, to varying degrees, made themselves a presence on the internet. When I finally decided, I need to address this, I need to respond to this, I first, of course, needed to see this film that had brought this idea to so many. And one evening I put time aside and decided to view this film Zeitgeist that was hailed by some as the ultimate expose of Christian origins. What I witnessed was not only a repeat of the nonsense I had earlier dismissed, but it raised the absurdity to a new level. Yet through it all, I became convinced of one thing very quickly. Peter Joseph, the film's creator, had encountered much of the same material I had years earlier, only he believed it. I did not discover until years later, by the way, that my initial suspicion of a connection between Zeitgeist and material of Jordan Maxwell was actually confirmed in a 2000 interview Peter Joseph did with Jeff Rense. It was shortly after the film had went viral. I did not know about this interview until many years later. He did this interview right after the film went viral. Jeff Rense specifically asked him about Jordan Maxwell because he noticed the same thing I did, I suppose. And Peter Joseph said this film was largely based on Maxwell's work, that he had studied Maxwell for years. He credited him as the source for much of the film, particularly parts 1 on Christianity and part 3 on the Federal Reserve, and called Maxwell the lifeblood of the piece. Now, besides this Maxwell material, related ideas about Christianity had also appeared in a number of popular books preceding the film that had their own spins. They were not necessarily all identical, but there was enough overlap that they generally appealed to the same audience. Most notable, couple I mentioned already: The Pagan Christ by Tom Harper, Jesus Mysteries by the duo of Timothy Freke and Peter Gandy, and also The Christ Conspiracy by D.M. Murdoch, who was writing under the name Acharya S. All of these helped pave the way for Zeitgeist, but it was Peter Joseph's film that finally broke it through to a mass audience. Now, although the claims that's made in the sort of material has no historical basis, and the evidence uses distortions and outright falsehoods, most Christians are simply in no position to refute them or even answer them partially. They just don't know the material. And think of it this way: put yourself in the place of just a faithful, everyday churchgoer who's never been exposed to this material. Suddenly you're challenged directly with the claim that Jesus never existed and Christianity is a fraud. You're told all you believe about Jesus is a lie: virgin birth, magi, baptism of Jordan, 12 disciples, crucifixion, death, bodily resurrection, ascension, all lies. There wasn't even a Jesus. You're told Jesus was nothing but an astrological metaphor for the sun. His disciples were the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the events in the Gospels corresponded to the solar cycle. Nefarious characters, potentates and priests of every kind, invented Jesus to control the masses. They used him as the pagan priests and rulers they replaced had used Horus and Mithras. In reality, Jesus was nothing more than a new and updated version of Egypt's Horus, right down to the nativity story on the walls of Luxor Temple. Now, perhaps you heard this from a coworker over the water cooler. Perhaps your son or daughter came home from church shaken by hearing this from a friend at school or college. This film Zeitgeist was mentioned, and you decide you need to see it for yourself. By the end of the first part of the film, the part on Christianity, your world's been turned upside down. your instincts, of course, is dismiss this whole thing. It's non. You can't. You know that this can't be true. But how are you going to answer this? You have no reason to. You have nothing. You really don't know how to answer this material. You want to give a good reason, but you don't have one. What if there's something to it? Your doubts start to linger, and you start to wonder, what if all this Jesus stuff really is just a lie? And that's only the beginning with Zeitgeist. Other versions of this sort of copycat thesis ideas are vying for attention in the internet. Is Jesus a son? Maybe he's a mushroom. I'm not kidding with that one, by the way. What if he's a space alien, or if he's Julius Caesar, or some other Caesar, or a member of a famous Roman aristocratic family, or maybe all of the above? Anything is possible in the brave new world of the internet. They can even hold to simultaneous ideas that are contradictory. It doesn't really matter, you see. Christians now face basically a cottage industry dedicated to creating all manner of bizarre theories, claiming Jesus never existed and the gospel accounts were copied from ideas in pagan mythology. It has become so thoroughly ridiculous that even historians and New Testament scholars who have no sympathy whatsoever for Christian claims have felt the need to respond in print to this contemporary phenomenon. I would reference you not only to Bart Ehrman's, probably made the most famous one, in Did Jesus Exist? But I think a better one by a New Testament scholar who just happens to be an atheist. Maurice Casey recently released a book, Jesus, Argument and Evidence or Mythicist Myths, in which he takes a mythicist position and shreds it to death. I mean, he really does a number on it. And anyone, particularly any atheists who happen to be listening to it, I would, since obviously I'm not going to be as convincing to them as because I would be considered to have a Christian bias, so I would point them in that direction. But moving back to the topic at hand, in my ebook series, I challenge those ideas, and basically the idea is to produce one ebook every 3 months or so. The 4 books, the foundational material stuff I mentioned in the last video, they're already been released, as well as 2 other books. The one on Jordan Maxwell and the one on solar mythology. And then future books will counter different other ideas, and they will be released, and I'll announce those on videos as well. Now, for those who I would also mention who are interested, the books may be read independently of each other. Although, as I said, if you have no experience with this topic at all, the first 4 books, the foundational material, might be helpful, but it's not strictly necessary. Now, I will also warn that in order to allow the books to be read independently, some of the material will overlap in different books, but that's necessary because the material appears in different theories. So it was necessary to do that, but I want to give fair warning on that one. Now, I realize that, as I said, my word on it, because I would be considered to have a bias, and everyone has a bias, so let's not kid ourselves. But certainly, although I would welcome anyone holding these views to, after reading my material, to change their mind, I'm not really necessarily expecting it, and they are not my target audience. Rather, my idea is to equip Christians, particularly pastors and apologists, who need to address these issues, but have not studied them in any great detail. And I hope that those books and these videos serving as an introduction to the books, will help those who may be facing these claims, and also remove obstacles for those who may be drawn to the gospel message but are confused by the misinformation out there. And I will begin in the next video. What I've done in this book series is there's much of the material just written straight out, and then there's other parts that are put in appendices because they're sort of side issues, and they may appear in more than one book as these appendices. So what I've done is, for these side issues, put them in different appendices, And I'm going to start doing videos that are based on some of the appendices that I've mentioned already. And I will begin that in the next video, and before moving on to some of the material that's in the chapters of the first book. And that will begin next time. But on that note, in all things, may the glory be to God alone. And until next time, God bless.